prepared a presentation as well. Just give me a second. Okay. So I hope you can see my presentation slides now on your screen.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so the title of my presentation is How to Co-Design e-Services in Local Communities. And before I start, I would like to give you a little bit background of myself. I work for Empirica, Technology and Communications Research, which is an independent research and organization based in Bonn, Germany. And since I joined Empirica in 1993, large parts of my work were focusing on challenges and opportunities presented by digital technologies to local communities. Rural communities, but also urban communities. And during that time, so we have seen a large number, an amazing large number of projects that were directed towards utilizing digital solutions for some sort of local problem, local issue. Let it be in relation to elderly care, in relation to civic participation, what have you. A large range of different topics, if you so want. But it occurred to me that in very, very many cases, so things went quite well in the beginning over a certain period of time, usually as long as some sort of funding was available from local sources, from national programs, or even European international programs. But in the longer run, so all these digital solutions, let's say, or many of the solutions, not all solutions, faded slowly out and disappeared from the scene. So so we were asking ourselves, okay, what might be the reason for this? And on my next slide, I have tried to summarize a few key lessons we have learned from earlier work throughout all these years. Of course, the digital technology landscape has changed over the years quite a lot, and also the conditions under which local communities try to utilize technologies for their purpose have changed, and the issues have changed. But here, just a few things that occurred to me are really turned out to be really decisive when it comes to, let's say, not just trying out digital technologies or digital solution, as it is often called, but really make them a sustainable, let's say, or really to achieve a sustainable contribution for the community over a longer period of time, ideally over years. So the first thing which is important from my point of view, so if you are not that much into the technology, let's say, territory, then from the public media, from what we have heard from others, from the, let's say, mainstream commercial digital markets, you tend to think, well, today everything is possible with help of technology. So there's quite an optimism bias, I would call, when it comes to the capabilities that are really provided by technology to solve certain issues, to tackle really some particular pressure points. Related to this, there's pretty often a kind of simplistic, let's say, assumption what benefits the technology really is able to deliver when it comes to addressing certain things. So we have heard from Medina earlier that, for instance, different, let's say, topics have been mentioned, very often, let's say, supporting elderly people living in the community. So the question is, what can technology really do to make them able to remain in the community when they get older and get more and more needs for support? There's also, in that context, pretty often a lack of sufficient and appropriate consideration of the non-technological, let's say, requirements that need to be fulfilled on getting a digital solution up and running. So let's take the example of let's say, supporting older people. There are quite a lot of apps and platforms around there where, let's say, voluntary or professional, let's say, carers can organize support to older people, even, let's say, support them remotely and so forth. So, but technology is only one component in that game. So you would also need to organize the type of support, the type of effort that is taken to by real people with help of technology. And that very often requires quite a lot of organizational, let's say, issues that need to be solved, a lot of funding issues, motivational issues, and all this kind of stuff, you know, which are not immediately concerning the technology as such. So similarly, it should not at all be taken as granted that every stakeholder who would have, let's say, a role to play in such a constellation where technology is used to support or to tackle a certain issue equally benefit from the technology. So as mentioned earlier, I mean, there's usually a kind of hype. Everybody is euphoric while trying out technology, but after a while, people, let's say, keep doing things with technology only if they perceive sufficient benefit for themselves. So it might well be that older persons benefit from, let's say, informal support delivered with help of technology. But in the longer run, how do informal supporters benefit? This does not necessarily only need to concern financial benefit, but it could be, let's say, a social benefit and these kind of things. But these benefits do not fall from the sky. Usually you need to, let's say, think of how you ensure that these types of benefits flow even after the initial euphoria to the different stakeholders. And if you do not consider these things, it might well be that after a certain period of time, you have this or another veto player in the overall game. And that brings me to the last point, which we very frequently observe, that bottom-up projects really that are driven from people in the community, very often on a voluntary basis, tend to struggle with resources in the longer term run, and also with the commitment of volunteers in the longer run. So it may be worth to think how these schemes might best be supported, perhaps by some sort of formalized support through public administration or so, but also how, let's say, the volunteers can, let's say, be motivated and supported to keep up their efforts and interests. So in a nutshell, quite a number of points that are relevant to be considered if we really think of how we can, let's say, ensure that digital experiments, which are, for instance, funded through national programs, let's say, have a sustainable impact in the community on the longer run, and not just dying after funding or the initial, let's say, run out, or the initial, let's say, euphoria trickles down more or less. So based on this experience, for me, it's pretty clear that sustainable digital service innovation in the community, let it be urban communities or rural communities, often or usually require more than just purchasing a digital tool, sorry, jumping on an online platform, just getting technology. So it's usually a stepwise approach, a cycle that needs to be taken in order to carefully plan and assess in advance, while you are on the way to introducing digital technologies, what makes sense, how to make it sustainable, and so forth. And what you can see here, this little circle, this is something or staged approach that has emerged from our practice over many years. So typically you start with some sort of initial idea. You may have even a smart village strategy. It may be formalized, it may be less formalized. So the context may vary quite a lot, but there is some sort of initial idea. Okay, let's use this or that digital, let's say, solution for addressing a certain pressure point we face in our community at the moment. But then you need to start very carefully, okay, what are really our requirements on such technology? Not the requirements we may know from let's say, commercial services, but our specific requirements. So it's something you would need to, let's say, look at really from the perspective of your local conditions, of your, let's say, circumstances. And then you may need to refine your initial idea in order to make them fit to your specific circumstances. Once you have done this, it may need to be, let's say, looked at how to design certain processes. How do we really make sure that people collaborate in a way that provides benefit to other people with help of technology? And then you start to develop an idea how technology will be used throughout these processes, which often requires designing what I would call a service. It's not just an application, not just a piece of technology, but a service that is provided with help of this technology. Let's take the example of supporting older people in the community. So, I mean, the service would not be an app where people can, let's say, call up volunteers for help. The service would be providing voluntary help in the community, and the app would be a kind of tool that is used by those providing the support in the community to really deliver the service, voluntary support. And then once you have it clear what type of service it is you are going to design, then you would start to implement it, start to make it happen in real world. And once the service runs a certain period of time, very often certain adaptations are required. Very often people realize, well, it doesn't deliver as we expected in this or that regard. Maybe we need to adapt this or that. So it's a never-ending circle, if you so want. And then you start again, think about the requirements you have on the service and so forth. So this is the basic idea behind the methodology that has emerged from our practice over quite some years by now. And the next slide is an attempt to summarize the methodology in just one slide. And what you can see here, I mean, you have some sort of starting point, as I mentioned earlier. So it may be an fully fledged out, even, let's say, documented smart rural strategy. It may also be a kind of initial idea. It may be a group of people thinking of how digital solutions could help to address this or that situation in the local community, whatever. So this needs to be, let's say, seen always in the specific context. So what you would then do in a first step is what we call ambition focusing, really in a systematic manner reflect on, okay, where do we currently stand? What are our circumstances? And where do we want to go? What do we want to achieve? I'm coming back to this a little bit later. And then once you have tried to, let's say, nail down the idea in more detail, then you would need to take one step back and reflect, ideally with all the stakeholders that need to be involved. Okay, do we really have everything in place to make our idea a reality? That's what we call maturity assessment. Are we really ready to take the step towards introducing digital technologies? Can we really put it in place under the circumstances prevailing at our specific community? And once that may, let's say, bring you back to the initial idea. Once you reflect on this in a systematic manner, you may identify roadblockers and so forth, and may readapt your initial idea. And only then you would start planning to make this happen in the real life. So how can we make this a reality? Who would need to do what, when, and so forth? And once you have a concrete plan, the operational planning, that's how we call it, then you start, let's say, implementing it into practice and monitor, does it really deliver as expected? Does it really work the way we anticipated? And then based on this experience, you can go back to whatever stage you deem relevant and try to adapt and optimize your service operation. So that's in a nutshell the kind of different steps the methodology has, and each step can be done, let's put it that way, with involving large people, the entire community, but it may also make sense, depending on the local situation and the point where you're at, to do it with a smaller group, perhaps with the key stakeholders who are involved. So it's difficult to, let's say, assess in advance how much effort you may need to put it in it, but it has proved useful even with a smaller effort, even if you gather key stakeholders around the table and do a kind of workshop setting, perhaps one workshop focusing on each of these steps. If you want to involve larger groups of people, perhaps the more citizens and so forth, then you would possibly need to organize more than one workshop. But the methodology is really designed to work in a very concise manner on certain aspects, certain questions. So from our experience, the workshop settings should not, let's say, involve more than people, 20 people at once. I mean, there are other, let's say, involvement methods and co-design methods for initial idea generation, for instance, where you tend to involve larger numbers of people at once, but this methodology is really designed to work in a concentrated manner of a number of questions, of key issues with concrete outputs. And based on this, I would like to say a few words in relation, I go back once, in relation to the core of the method, which is really, let's say, the planning, the preparation of the real implementation. Because what we have learned throughout the years, careful preparation takes time and effort, but it pays off in the end of the day. I mean, you can immediately jump into something and try out something, technology, but then you may realize that all the points you may have considered in advance hit you on the spot, and then it's not that easy to, let's say, develop responses to the problems you may notice if you start implementing things just right now. Okay, so ambition focusing. This is the first step. If you have some sort of idea, more or less, let's say, documented, perhaps not at all documented, then the key questions here, the first thing would be, okay, who runs the show? That means, according to our experience, it usually requires a core group of people who put, let's say, effort into all these things over a certain period in time, who are capable of communicating their ideas to others. So let's say a kind of core group driving the entire process. This may be paid people from the public administration, for instance, but in other cases, it can also be, let's say, a group of voluntary organizations who are, let's say, interested in driving the entire development towards using digital technologies for some reason. So it depends very much. You can't, let's say, tell in general. So it depends on the local circumstances. But without such a core group, let's say, running the show, driving this process, very often the process fades out pretty soon, because this process means some work. So it means really to put brain into it, time into it, effort into it. Okay, then the next question would be, okay, which stakeholders would have a role to play in service delivery with help of technologies? Do we rely on voluntary supporters? Is there a role for local businesses? Is there a role for the local administration? So it depends very much on the topic, on the circumstances. So it's difficult to tell in general, but this needs to be seen on a case-to-case basis. And then the next question arriving from, once you know who are the stakeholders, or can they all agree on a common view? What should be done, what needs to be done. And this is quite amazing that on the let's say surface, everybody agrees what should be done. So that's easy. And so everybody knows, okay, we want to do something good for the older people, or want to enable public transport, improve public transport with help of technology. So at that level, it's easy to arrive at consensus. But once you start to dig more into detail, who is going to do what by when, with what effort, and so forth, then it's amazing to see how different the views might be. So therefore, our experience is it's important, or it's a good thing, to write things down, to have a common document everybody can refer to, not, let's say, to have something, let's say, made in stone. So this document can change, the idea can change, but to have something on the table where everybody can refer to. And the other advantage is also to have something on the table you can show to others, to administration, to politicians, to get support for the ideas. So, and here again, so it's difficult to exactly pre-specify what, let's say, question these common vision would need to address, but questions that are very typical are mentioned here on this slide. So there are a number of questions, okay, in relation to where do we start from? So what people do we address? What issues do we address? Who is concerned by the issue, by the problem we face? And try to be as specific as possible at that stage, because generic assumptions are fine, as I said, but later on, the technology can only do very specific things. So are there any existing forms of support for the groups we are addressing, stakeholders involved already? Are there already some sort of existing collaborations between formal supporters, voluntary supporters, between citizens or not? So also, what should the geographic boundaries be for the type of digitally supported service we have in mind? So, and then similar, where do we want to go? How can technology contribute? Are there already technologies available that might serve our purposes? Maybe mainstream technology, maybe, I don't know, maybe we can achieve something by using mainstream services such as WhatsApp or other messages and so forth. Or do we need to look for a specific solution that is not yet readily available, which needs to be developed? Can we buy it? Do we need to look for a program supporting us in developing it, and so forth? All these kind of questions come into play here. And then finally, that refers to what I already said. So what would we like to gain? And not just on a high level as a community, but on the level of the individual stakeholders that would need to be involved. Has really each stakeholder something to gain? And if not, then it might be worth discussing with the stakeholders whether or not the stakeholder would be willing to play a role, and what role, and under what circumstances, and so forth. That might concern funding, that might concern other types of, let's say, resources and support and activities. So it needs to be seen. So you would need to, let's say, look at what you specifically have in mind, and then under what circumstances, to really find out here what benefits might be concerned. And very quickly, stand back. Do we have everything in place here? The key thing is really to identify roadblockers, or whether you need to let's say, refine or adapt your initial ideas. And then finally, you arrive at a planning stage. And here, the idea is that you would set up a detailed planning. Okay, what tasks have to be performed and by when and by whom, what resources need to be made available, when and by whom, and is there a risk that task will fail or be delayed, and then what should we do then in such a case? So this would be then the implementation planning phase. And that's basically it already. So thank you.